The city of Constantinople was in chaos. The year was 1205, and the once mighty capital of the Byzantine Empire was under siege. Baudouin, the newly crowned Latin emperor, stood atop the walls, his heart pounding with a mix of determination and fear. The sky was dark, and the air was thick with the smoke of burning buildings. The sound of arrows whizzing through the air and the clanging of swords was deafening. Baudouin had never expected this. He had joined the Fourth Crusade in 1202, dreaming of reaching the Holy Land and reclaiming Jerusalem. Instead, he found himself leading an army that had turned against Constantinople, the very city he had once hoped to ally with. The siege had been brutal, and now, as the walls crumbled and his men fell, he realized that his fate was sealed. The city's defenses were breached, and the Latin forces poured in, ransacking and pillaging. But amidst the chaos, Baudouin's luck ran out. He was captured by the Bulgarian forces, who had allied with the Greek rebels. The Bulgarians, led by the ruthless Kaloyan, had a score to settle. They dragged Baudouin away, his cries for mercy falling on deaf ears. Baudouin was thrown into a dark, dank cell, his hands and feet bound. For days he was left to rot, his once proud spirit broken, but Kaloyan was not done with him. One fateful night, the emperor was dragged out of his cell and brought before Kaloyan. The Bulgarian ruler's eyes were cold and calculating. He had a twisted plan for his prisoner. Kaloyan accused Baudouin of trying to seduce his wife, a crime punishable by death. Whether it was true or a lie woven by the empress to exact her revenge, Baudouin had no chance to defend himself. Kaloyan's men beat him mercilessly, and when the emperor could no longer stand, Kaloyan himself stepped forward. With a swift, brutal motion, he ended Baudouin's life. The final indignity came when Kaloyan had Baudouin's skull turned into a drinking cup, a grisly trophy to remind all of the fate that awaited those who crossed him. News of Baudouin's gruesome death spread quickly. His brother, Henry, was crowned the new Latin emperor, but the shadow of his brother's fate loomed over him. Henry knew he had to act fast to secure his rule. He married Maria of Bulgaria, hoping to forge an alliance, but the marriage was fraught with tension. Maria harbored deep resentment over Baudouin's death, and Henry lived in constant fear of her betrayal. Henry's reign was marked by constant strife. He went to war against Bulgaria, determined to avenge his brother, but the battles were brutal and costly. In 1216, Henry's worst fears came true. He was poisoned, and many suspected Maria had a hand in his death. The Latin Empire was left in turmoil once again. Pierre II de Courtenay, Henry's brother-in-law, was next in line to the throne. He marched from France, determined to claim his rightful place. The journey was long and perilous, but he finally arrived in Rome, where he was crowned emperor by Pope Honorius III. However, his triumph was short-lived. On his way to Constantinople, Pierre was captured by Theodoros of Epirus and met a cruel end in prison. The Latin Empire was now in the hands of Pierre's wife, Yolande. She ruled with a strong will, but her reign was brief. When her brother Robert de Courtenay arrived in 1221, she willingly stepped aside. Robert had his own plans, but they were complicated by family ties. He had intended to marry Eudoxia, the daughter of the late emperor, but his sister was already married to Theodoros. Robert could not be both brother-in-law and son-in-law to the emperor, so he chose a different bride, a nobleman's fiancée. The jilted nobleman's anger was fierce, and he chased Robert from Constantinople. Robert fled to Rome, seeking the Pope's help. The Pope convinced him to return, but fate had other plans. Robert died before he could make it back to Constantinople, leaving the empire in a state of uncertainty. The Latin Empire's troubles were far from over. The next in line was Jean of Brienne, the king of Jerusalem. He was invited to become emperor-regent in 1229, with the condition that Pierre's youngest son, Baudouin de Courtenay, would marry his daughter and succeed him. Jean's reign was marked by constant battles against Iones III of Nicaea and Ionasan II of Bulgaria. Despite his efforts, he died without fully securing the empire's future. Young Baudouin was crowned in 1237, but his rule was fraught with challenges. He ruled only the city of Constantinople, and was forced upon the crown of thorns to pay for an army. When that failed, he sold religious relics to raise money, and even handed his son Philippe to Venetian merchants to secure a loan. He sold his inheritance in Flanders, but even that was not enough to save his lands. In 1261, Byzantine soldiers entered Constantinople through a secret passageway and reclaimed the city for Mikhail VIII. Baudouin fled, leaving his crown and scepter behind. He sought help in France but was unsuccessful. Baudouin died in Naples in 1273, the last emperor of the Latin Empire, his dreams of a grand empire shattered by the relentless tide of history. Kekos I, the successor of a great ruler, tried to keep the peace by making a deal with Theodoros. However, his brothers didn't agree and started causing trouble. The emirs, powerful leaders, had to step in and lock them up. Kekos I then joined forces with the Fifth Crusade to fight against the Ayyubids, a powerful dynasty in the Middle East. In 1214, while out hunting, Kekos I was captured by Emperor Alexios of Trebizond. To be set free, he had to give up the Black Sea port of Sinop as a ransom. Kekos died in 1220, and his brother Kayqubad took over as sultan. Kayqubad was a strong leader who conquered the Mengücek and Mingburnu tribes, and expanded his territory as other groups, like the Mongols and Georgians, withdrew. Kayqubad preferred his younger son, Is-al-Din, to rule after him, but the emirs wanted his older son, Kekosra II, to take the throne. They helped Kekosra seize power. To avoid a conflict, Kekosra married a Georgian princess. However, his troubles were far from over. Baba Ishak, a preacher, was spreading Islam among the Turkmen, and they rebelled against Kekosra. Baba Ishak was eventually captured and executed, and the Turkmen were defeated. But in 1243, the Mongols attacked and defeated Kekosra's army at the Kostag Pass. Kekosra had to run away with his treasure and family, and he became a vassal of the Mongols. Kekosra had a sickly infant son named Kayqubad, but the emirs chose his eldest son, Kekos II, to rule in 1246. Kekos delayed a payment to the Mongols in 1254, which led to a Mongol invasion. Kayqubad was sent to negotiate but was killed on the way. Some people thought his brothers were behind it. The Mongols overran the Rum Empire, and Kekos had to flee to the Balkans, where he was imprisoned by the Byzantines. Kekosra's brother, Kilij IV, was strangled by his stepfather for becoming too powerful. Kayqubad asked for help from the Golden Horde, a Mongol group, and they invaded the empire in 1265. Kayqubad went into exile in the Crimea and ignored his son's pleas to return. The emirs wanted Kilij's young son, Kekosra, to rule, but Ahmed Tekur continued to govern after coming of age in 1283. The Mongols encouraged the young heir to rebel, but Ahmed executed him and installed Kekos II's son, Masud II, as sultan. When Ahmed's successor, Arghun, took control, he gave half the empire to Ahmed's young sons, but Masud had them both executed. The Mongols and Turkmen grew tired of Masud, and had him imprisoned in 1297. Kekos's nephew, Kayqubad III, was appointed sultan in 1298, but was soon implicated in a plot and executed. Masud returned to power, but the Sultanate of Rum disappeared around 1306. The Mongols invaded the area now known as Turkmenistan, enslaving and massacring many people. A small group of horsemen escaped, and their leader Ertugrul was given land for helping the Seljuk Empire fight the Byzantines. Ertugrul's son, Osman the Bonebreaker, became the leader in 1281, and refugees fleeing from the Mongols and the Caliphate of Damascus joined him. By 1299, Osman declared his independence. In 1301, his forces defeated the Byzantines near Nicaea, forcing them to leave Anatolia. Orhan became the Bey in 1326, but his brother, Alidin, ran the empire and created a loyal army called the Yea. Orhan, feeling threatened, built his own army of Janissaries, young Christian boys raised as soldiers. In 1329, this new army defeated Emperor Andronicus III at the Battle of Pelikanon, and the Byzantines surrendered the city of Nicaea. In 1345, Orhan's two sons quarreled, so he executed one and imprisoned the other. Orhan took sides in the Byzantine civil war by marrying the daughter of Emperor Iones, the fifth regent, and then switched allegiance by sending Ottoman soldiers to help Iones VI become co-emperor. An earthquake struck the Gallipoli Peninsula in 1354, and Ottoman troops occupied it, giving them a bridgehead into Europe. Orhan refused an offer of money to withdraw, knowing the strategic importance of the area. He was devastated when his eldest son, Pasha, died in a riding accident in 1357, and Orhan died 5 years later. Murad I the Sovereign established the title of Sultan in 1383. His youngest son, Savsai, tried to seize power when Andronicus refused to pay his father's ransom. Emperor Iones V then disinherited Savsai, leading to a joint rebellion with Andronicus against their fathers. After it failed, Murad killed Savsai and forced Iones to imprison and blind Andronicus. Murad led campaigns against the Serbs, Bulgarians, and Hungarians with his Janissaries, bringing most of the Balkans under Ottoman rule and forcing the Byzantine Emperor to pay tribute. The Serbs were defeated at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, but Murad was assassinated after the battle. Bayezid, his son, strangled his older brother, Yakub, to become Sultan. Bayezid I the Thunderbolt conquered Bulgaria and northern Greece, but lost the Battle of Ravine in 1394. He then besieged Constantinople. Gismund of Hungary answered Emperor Manaul II's call for help, but was defeated at the Battle of Nicopolis in 1396. A Timurid army, led by the Muslim ruler Timur, broke the siege in 1402 and imprisoned Bayezid and his son, Mustafa. Bayezid died in 1403, and his 4 remaining sons fought each other. Musa had Issa assassinated in a public bath in 1406, and Suleiman was murdered in 1411. Musa was killed at the Battle of Karmalu in 1413. Mehmed I the Gentleman was appointed Sultan in 1413, and is known as the second founder of the Ottoman Empire, because he conquered parts of Albania and large parts of Anatolia. Mustafa demanded part of the empire when the Timurids released him, but Mehmed exiled him. His nephew Orhan was also blinded for plotting. Murad II became Sultan in 1421, and faced long wars in the Balkans and Anatolia. His uncle, Mustafa, escaped from exile, and Emperor Manaul II acknowledged him as the heir. Mustafa captured Adrianople and crossed the Dardanelles, but was captured and executed. Murad retaliated by besieging Constantinople. The Byzantines supported a rebellion in Anatolia by his teenage brother, Mustafa, and Murad had to abandon the siege to catch and execute his brother. Murad continued to capture territories in the Balkans, and the Holy Roman Empire and Poland joined the Serbian-Hungarian coalition after the Ottomans annexed Serbia in 1439. Murad abdicated in favor of his young son, Mehmed II, in 1444, but had to return to the throne when the Janissaries revolted against the child's unpopular teacher. Murad stopped Janos Huniades' invasion at the Battle of Varna in 1444, and then abdicated again. Mehmed defeated another Christian alliance at the Second Battle of Kosovo in 1448, and took control of the Bosporus Strait over the next 3 years. He captured Constantinople in 1453 and made it his capital, earning the title the Conqueror. Vlad III, known as Vlad the Impaler, refused to pay tribute to the Ottomans. When Mehmed's envoys visited Wallachia, they were killed, and their heads were delivered to Mehmed. Vlad then went on the offensive, massacring 2 Ottoman armies in Bulgaria and impaling thousands of prisoners. However, Vlad was betrayed and had to hide in the mountains while the Ottomans invaded Wallachia. The Ottomans went to war with the Venetians in 1463, after a Muslim slave stole a large quantity of silver from Coroni and converted to Christianity. Mehmed was furious when the Venetians failed to execute the slave, so he built a fleet to attack them. Civil wars in the Balkans allowed Mehmed to capture Mora, the southern part of Greece, Serbia, and Bosnia. He executed the last Bosnian king, Estijepan Temesvik, but Hungarian and Venetian counter-invasions undermined Ottoman power. The 1479 Treaty of Constantinople ended the conflict, but the Venetians had to pay a huge indemnity and tribute on Black Sea trade. Mehmed marched his army back to the Constantinople area in 1481, but fell sick and died, either from natural causes or poisoning. Bayezid II just defeated his brother Sem and his supporters, the Mamluks of Egypt. Sem fled to Rhodes but was handed over to Pope Innocent VIII and died in prison. In 1492, Fernando and Isabel expelled the Jewish population from Aragon and Castile, followed by the Moors a few years later. Bayezid sent his navy across the Mediterranean to rescue them, increasing anti-Christian support in the Ottoman lands. The Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam, died in 632, and 2 years later, His companion JOUR captured Jerusalem from the Byzantines. In 1095, Pope Urban II called for a crusade to recapture Jerusalem and help the Byzantine Empire fight the Seljuk Turks. Godefroy de Bouillon, Bomondo de Taranto, Raymond IV de Toulouse, and Roberto de Flanders led the Crusaders, who traveled separately across Europe and reached Constantinople in November 1096. Alexios I asked for help to recapture Byzantine lands, but Godefroy's brother Baldwin and Tancred headed east into Edessa, while Bomondo captured and claimed Antioch for himself in 1098. The rest of the Crusaders captured Jerusalem the following year. Raymond refused to become king of the new kingdom, but Godefroy accepted, though he rejected the title of king, believing Christ was the true king of Jerusalem. Godefroy defeated an Egyptian Fatimid army at the Battle of Ascalon, and stopped Raymond and Dagobert from capturing Jerusalem. Godefroy died in 1110 from a mysterious illness, possibly from a poisoned apple. Count Baldwin of Edessa was invited to Jerusalem, and immediately invaded Fatimid territory. He returned to be crowned king, and, unlike his brother, had no qualms about the ceremony in Bethlehem on December 25, 1100. Baldwin captured Acre, north of Jerusalem, and abandoned his Armenian wife, Arda, in a monastery, claiming she had been raped by pirates. He then married Roger I of Sicily's widow, Adelaide. The Caliph of Baghdad ordered attacks on the Crusaders, and while Edessa held out, the Abbasids defeated Baldwin at the Battle of Al-Sanabra in 1113. He fell sick and blamed his illness on his bigamous marriage. He marched into Egypt the following year and died after eating a fish dinner. The throne was offered to Eustace III, but Count Gisselin of Edessa insisted the crown should pass to Bald, when II the Thorny, who accepted. After fighting off the Syrians and Egyptians, he defeated Roger of Salerno on the Field of Blood in 1119 and recovered Antioch. Hugues de Payens captured Temple Mount and named it the Temple of Solomon, forming the Knights Templar. The Crusaders captured Tyre in 1124, but could not take Damascus. Baldwin intended to take over Edessa after Gisselin was captured, but was also taken prisoner. They were both rescued, but Baldwin was recaptured and ransomed in exchange for Gisselin's son, and one of Baldwin's daughters. Melisende was crowned queen in 1131, but had to share the crown with Count Fulk of Anjou, a short, ugly man twice her age. Fulk spread rumors that Melisende was having an affair with her cousin, Hugh of Jaffa, leading to a rebellion. Fulk made peace, but tried to have Hugh murdered in exile. He then turned away Byzantine help, telling Emperor John II the area could not support a large army. Fulk died while out hunting in 1143, and Melisende told everyone her son, the teenage Baldwin III, was simple-minded so she could remain in control. The new Zengid dynasty of Mosul soon posed a threat, capturing Edessa in 1144 and defeating the Crusaders at the Battle of Basra in 1147. The Second Crusade reached Jerusalem the following year, but Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany made an ill-advised attack on Damascus before returning home. Mosul then invaded Antioch and killed Raymond at the Battle of Inab in 1149. Melisende became regent for the principality in Baldwin's name, but Jerusalem had to cede Edessa to the Byzantines in 1150. Baldwin wanted to take charge and paraded through Jerusalem with a laurel wreath on his head to prove his point. The high court gave Baldwin the north of the kingdom to rule and Melisende the south, but Baldwin went to war with his mother. Jerusalem opened its gates to him, and his mother and brother, Amalric, were besieged in the Tower of David until they reconciled in 1154. Baldwin married Manuel's niece Theodora to make peace with the Byzantines so he could focus on defeating Mosul. He then married his cousin Maria to the emperor to further seal their alliance. Melisende died in 1161, and Baldwin was poisoned by his doctor 2 years later, dying after a long illness. Amalric immediately invaded Egypt, claiming it had not paid tribute, but the Fatimids flooded the Nile, forcing him to turn back. Bomondo III of Antioch and Raymond III of Tripoli were captured at the Battle of Haram in 1164, and while Amalric paid the ransom for Bomondo, Raymond remained a prisoner. Control of Acre reverted to Jerusalem when Baldwin III's widow, Theodora, eloped with her cousin Andronicus. Amalric renewed the alliance with Byzantium by marrying Manuel's great-grandniece Maria, allowing him to attack Egypt. Although Amalric and Manuel united to besiege Damietta, they withdrew when their food supplies ran out. Saladin, leader of the new Egyptian Ayyubid dynasty, invaded Jerusalem in 1170, and Amalric made peace while desperately trying to get help from Europe. Amalric died in 1174, and his sickly teenage son Baldwin was crowned. His regent, Raymond of Tripoli, ignored the treaty with the Ayyubids and defeated Saladin at the Battle of Montgisard with the help of the Knights Templar. Raymond married his sister Sibylla to William of Montferrat, but he died soon after, leaving her pregnant. The ailing Baldwin, now suffering from leprosy, married Sibylla to Guy of Lusignan in 1180, and made Guy his regent following the Battle of Belvoir Castle. Guy was at the wedding of Baldwin's young half-sister, Isabella, in 1183 when Saladin attacked the venue, Kerak Fortress. Guy refused to help lift the siege, so Baldwin made his young nephew co-king, and was working to annul Guy's marriage when he died. Henry II of England and Philip II of France both turned down the throne, so young Baldwin V was proclaimed king. The Patriarch of Jerusalem, Heraclius, and the Grand Masters of the Knights Templar and Knights Hospitaller agreed that the kings of England and France, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Pope would decide whether Sibylla or Isabella would claim the throne if Baldwin died. Baldwin died a few months later, and Sibylla annulled her marriage to Guy on the condition she could choose her next husband. She divorced, was crowned queen, and immediately announced she would remarry Guy and gave him the crown. Her enemies claimed she was illegitimate and fought to get Isabella crowned instead. Saladin's victory at the Battle of Hattin in 1187 was a turning point. He captured Guy of Lusignan, the king of Jerusalem, and beheaded Raynald of Chatillon, a fierce enemy. Jerusalem fell to Saladin, and Sibylla, the queen, fled to Tripoli with her 2 daughters. The first kingdom of Jerusalem was over. Saladin thought Guy was a weak leader, and released him. Guy and Sibylla went to Tyre, but Conrad of Montferrat, who was in charge there, refused to let them in. Conrad was waiting for the kings of Europe to decide who should be the new king of Jerusalem. Instead, Guy and Sibylla joined the Third Crusade, led by Philip II of France and Richard I of England. Sadly, Sibylla and her daughters died in a sickness that spread through the Crusader camp. Sibylla's half-sister, Isabella, became the next in line for the throne. She had already had a lot of ups and downs. She was once betrothed to pay off a debt, and even had her wedding venue, Kerak Fortress, besieged by Saladin. Later, Henry of Champagne, Richard's cousin, kidnapped her and annulled her marriage because she was too young. To get the throne, Isabella had to marry Conrad, even though the church said they were too closely related. Guy refused to give up his claim to the throne and joined Richard's attack on Cyprus in 1191, even saving Conrad's life in battle. When Richard wanted to go home in 1192, he needed to decide who should be the next king. Conrad was chosen, but he was assassinated by the assassins just 4 days later. Richard was suspected, but he left immediately, selling Cyprus to Guy. On his way, Richard was captured by Conrad's cousin in Austria and accused of murder. He was later released after a large ransom was paid, thanks to a forged letter that blamed the assassins. Meanwhile, Henry of Champagne married Isabella, who was pregnant, just a week after Conrad's murder. Tragedy struck again when Henry fell from a palace window and died, crushed by his servant, who tried to save him. Isabella then married Amalric II, who had recently inherited Cyprus. They secured a 10-year truce, while Saladin's family fought over his legacy. Amalric died in 1205, and Isabella passed away just 4 days later. Isabella and Conrad's teenage daughter, Maria, became the new queen with John of Ibelin as her regent. Philip II of France and Pope Innocent III found a husband for Maria, and in 1210 John of Brienne married her. Maria died giving birth 2 years later, and her daughter Isabel became the new queen with her father as regent. John of Brienne was a key figure during the Fifth Crusade, but it failed because the leader, Pelagius of Albano, refused to accept the Sultan of Egypt's terms. John met the emperor in 1223 to ask for help, and Friedrich II promised a crusade if he could be made king of Jerusalem. He married John's daughter Isabella in 1225, but demanded the kingdom immediately. Friedrich delayed his crusade, and Pope Gregory IX excommunicated him. Friedrich eventually reached Jerusalem, crowned himself king, and then imprisoned Isabella in his harem in Palermo, where she died giving birth to their son, Conrad. Friedrich offered John the position of emperor-regent to make amends, and while John ruled Constantinople, he had to fight off Emperor John III of Nicaea and Ivan Asen II of Bulgaria in 1235. The title of Jerusalem passed to Friedrich's son, Conrad, in 1228. Conrad and his son, also named Conrad, held the title until the elder Conrad died in 1268. The younger Conrad, known as Conradin, never married, and the title passed to Hugh III of Cyprus. Hugh died in 1284, and his son John died a few months later, possibly poisoned by his brothers. Henry II of Cyprus was the last king of Jerusalem, but the title was abolished after the fall of Acre, the last Crusader stronghold, in 1291. Guy of Lusignan became king of Jerusalem when he married Sibylla in 1186, and was crowned king of Cyprus in 1192. He was succeeded on both thrones by his older brother Amory, who was followed by his son, Hugh. The line of succession became uncertain when Hugh died young in 1218, and his infant son inherited the throne. Henry's mother was regent, but her uncle Philip of Ibelin took control. When Friedrich II arrived, Philip crowned young Henry. The regency passed to Philip's brother John, but Friedrich forced him to hand over Henry and Cyprus in 1228. Friedrich soon left, and John regained control, leading to the War of the Lombards between their supporters. Henry the Fat, as he came to be known, took control of the kingdom when he came of age in 1232, and later served as regent for Conrad of Jerusalem from 1246. Henry's death in 1253 left Cyprus with the infant Hugh II as its king. John of Ibelin took Hugh and his mother to Acre in 1258, but Hugh died as a teenager. His regent, Hugh III the Great, claimed Jerusalem on his behalf after Conradin's execution in 1268. However, Hugh fell out with factions in Jerusalem and left for Cyprus. Hugh died in 1284, and Charles of Anjou opposed the succession of his son, John II. John II died soon after, possibly poisoned by his brothers. Henry II escaped from the siege of Acre in 1291 and became unpopular. His son, Amalric, tried to retake the Holy Land with Mongol help, but when the Mongols didn't show up, he called on the Knights Templar. They helped him capture Hugh, but Pope Clement V ordered Amalric to arrest the Knights Templar in 1307, making him unpopular. He had to crush an uprising, exile his brother Henry, and arrest many nobles. Amalric was murdered soon after, and Henry was restored to the throne, where he would reign until 1324. Henry II's successor, Hugh IV, allowed Venetian merchants to settle in Cyprus, and later had to deal with Genoese merchants who wanted the same. While he was nominally king of Jerusalem, he focused on ruling Cyprus and stopped his two sons from going to Europe to recruit support for a crusade to Jerusalem. Peter founded the Order of the Sword in 1347, dedicated to the recovery of Jerusalem, and the brothers left without their father's permission, so he imprisoned them on their return and executed the man who helped them escape. Hugh resigned in 1358. Peter had more ambition and invaded Cilicia and Anatolia, while the Ottomans attacked the Byzantines. He then invaded Egypt and sacked Alexandria in 1365, but no one would help him capture Cairo, so he returned home. Peter traveled across Europe, trying to get support for a new crusade, but he returned to find his wife, Eleanor, had been unfaithful. He persecuted her favorite nobles, until 3 of them murdered him in his bed in 1369. Eleanor conspired against her teenage son, Peter II's regent, her uncle John of Lusignan, believing he had organized her husband's murder. The Venetians and Genoese argued over who should hold the left and right reins of the king's horse, symbolizing who was senior. Many Genoese were arrested during the fight at the feast. The Venetians sailed their ships into Famagusta's harbor, claiming to negotiate, but they captured the port and imprisoned Peter and his mother. Peter II the Fat was forced to pay a ransom and left Cyprus in 1374, while his estranged wife Eleanor was sent back to Spain after causing many scandal. Peter's uncle James had been arrested in Rhodes, and most of his 12 children were born in captivity. He promised the Genoese commercial privileges to secure his release, and was greeted enthusiastically on his return to Cyprus in 1385. In 1398, James was succeeded by Janus, who had been left behind as a hostage when his father was elected king. Janus planned to recapture Famagusta in 1402 using duplicate keys, but he was betrayed and his accomplices were executed. The Mamluks attacked Cyprus, and Janus was captured at the Battle of Kirikisha in 1426. He was taken to Cairo, tied in chains, and forced to ride a donkey before being made to kneel and worship in front of the Sultan. Alexis started a rebellion and was declared king, but he was captured and tortured when news arrived that Janus was returning. Alexis was executed the day Janus landed. Janus's son, John III, was crowned in 1432, but was controlled by his wife, Helena. She cut off his mistress's nose and then fought his illegitimate son, James, for control of the king. John died in 1458 and was succeeded by his daughter, Charlotte, who had been widowed at 13. Her mother may have murdered her husband, leaving her free to remarry Louis of Savoy in exchange for Geno's assistance. Charlotte's half-brother, James the Bastard, arrived in 1460 and blockaded her in a castle until Mamluks helped her escape to Rome. James was crowned, and while Charlotte initially adopted Alfonso of Aragon as her heir, she eventually ceded her claim in exchange for a pension. James married the teenage Caterina Cornaro of Venice by proxy, but it was 4 years before they met. She became pregnant, but James died in 1473, possibly poisoned. His son, James III, died under suspicious circumstances before his first birthday, and Venice forced Caterina to abdicate in 1489. Cyprus then became a Venetian colony. The Byzantine Empire recovered Edessa from the Ayyubid dynasty, but it was still in danger. Thoros asked Baldwin of Boulogne for help in 1098, so Baldwin broke off from the crusade to Jerusalem and headed to Edessa. He convinced Thoros to adopt him as a son and heir, but Thoros was assassinated soon after, so Baldwin took the title of Count of Edessa. Baldwin was crowned king of Jerusalem in 1100, so his cousin Baldwin of Berk became Count of Edessa and took an Armenian wife to ally with her family. However, both Baldwin and Jocelyn of Courtenay were captured when Mosul attacked in 1104, and Bomondo's brother Tancred was Edessa's regent until they were ransomed 3 years later. Baldwin had to defeat Tancred to regain control of his city, but the Ayyubids kept up the pressure, capturing all the lands east of the Euphrates by 1110. Eustace was offered the title when Baldwin died in 1118, but he did not want to leave France, so Baldwin II became king of Jerusalem while Jocelyn took over Edessa. Jocelyn was captured in 1122, and Baldwin was captured trying to rescue him. Jocelyn escaped in 1123 and organized Baldwin's release. Jocelyn was killed fighting the Danishmends in 1131, and his son, Jocelyn II, argued with the Counts of Tripoli rather than improving the county's defenses. Jocelyn II allied with Antioch and the Byzantines against Aleppo in 1138, but stirred up riots so that Emperor John II left with his army. John II and Fulk of Jerusalem both died in 1143, so Aleppo attacked while Edessa had no strong allies. Edessa soon fell to Zengi, leaving Jocelyn holding the lands west of the Euphrates. Zengi was assassinated in 1146, and Jocelyn briefly recaptured Edessa, losing it to Zengi's son, Nur ad-Din. The Second Crusade was organized to recapture Edessa, but it traveled to Damascus instead while Jocelyn was captured in 1150, trying to get help from Antioch. He was taken to Aleppo, publicly blinded, and died in prison 9 years later. Jocelyn's son, Jocelyn III, was captured at the Battle of Harim in 1164, and was not ransomed for 12 years. He joined Jerusalem's court, and in 1185 became Baldwin V's guardian. The regent, Raymond III, did not want to be accused of murder if the baby died because he had a lot to gain. Young Baldwin still died in 1186. Jocelyn III was present at the disastrous Battle of Hattin in 1187, where the Crusader army was decimated. Saladin would soon capture Jerusalem and Jocelyn's remaining estates. While Baldwin of Boulogne headed east to set up the county of Edessa, the rest of the First Crusade continued south to Antioch and besieged the city over the winter of 1097 to 98. Bomondo of Taranto bribed a guard to let the Crusaders enter the city, just a few days before an army from Mosul reached the city. Although the Crusaders weathered the siege, the Byzantine Emperor Alexius I turned back, believing Edessa had fallen. A mystic named Peter Bartholom produced what he called the Holy Lance, the spear used on Jesus while he was on the cross, having planted it himself. Whatever the spear's history, Bomondo marched out of the city with it at the head of his troops and defeated the Mosul army. Bomondo was captured in battle by the Danishmends in 1100, and his nephew Tancred became regent. Tancred was with Baldwin II of Edessa when he was captured at the Battle of Harran in 1104. Bomondo was released in 1103 and raised troops in Italy, which he used to attack the Byzantines. He was soon defeated by Emperor Alexius I at the Dyrrhachium in 1108, and was forced to sign the Treaty of Davao, making Antioch a vassal state of the Byzantine Empire after Bomondo's death. When Baldwin and Jocelyn were captured, Tancred became regent of Edessa and Antioch, while Bomondo returned to Italy, where he died looking for help in 1111. Alexius wanted Antioch, but Tancred's nephew Roger of Salerno refused to hand it over when Tancred died the following year, becoming regent to young Bomondo II. Roger was killed at the Field of Blood in 1119, and the imprisoned Bald, when the second was made regent while Antioch became a vassal state of Jerusalem. Bomondo II ruled for only 4 years, and Baldwin II and then Fulk of Jerusalem were regents for his infant daughter Constance. At 10 years old, she was married to Raymond of Poitiers, 26 years her senior in 1136. But Raymond's attack on Cilicia failed, and Emperor John II forced him to submit to him. John led the armies of Byzantium, Antioch, and Edessa against Syria, but Raymond and Jocelyn played dice while John conducted the siege of Chazar. Once back in Antioch, Jocelyn II of Edessa stirred up resentment until the Byzantines were forced to leave. Edessa would fall in 1144, and Nur ad-Din captured the eastern part of Antioch soon after, while Raymond was killed at the Battle of Inabin in 1149. His widow, Constance, married Reynold of Chatillon in 1153, but he too became a vassal to the Byzantines after arguing over Cyprus. Reynold was captured by the Muslims in 1160, and the Patriarch of Antioch took control. While Manuel married Constance's daughter Maria, she was deposed and replaced by her son Bomondo III in 1163. Bomondo was taken prisoner at the Battle of Harran the following year, but was soon released and married one of Manuel's nieces. The Byzantine alliance ended with the death of the Emperor Manuel in 1180, leaving Antioch unable to stop Saladin's assault in 1187. Bomondo's son, also named Bomondo, became Count of Tripoli following the Battle of Hattin, while his eldest son, Raymond, took control of Antioch in 1201. But the brothers fought, and Bomondo seized control by 1207. Bomondo III's grandson, Raymond Rupin, briefly ruled as a rival, but Bomondo of Tripoli died in 1233, and his son Bomondo V, nicknamed One Eye, or the Cyclops, played no part in the Crusades across the Holy Land. Bomondo VI married Sibylla to ally with Armenia, but then became caught up in the conflict between the Mamluks and the Mongols. He eventually submitted to the Mongols, at his father-in-law's insistence, and fought alongside Hatum I during their conquest of Syria. They captured Aleppo and Damascus, but the Mongols were defeated at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260. The Mamluks then turned on Antioch and captured the city in 1268, before taking Acre in 1291. After nearly 200 years, the Crusader states ceased to exist. After the First Crusade, Raymond IV of Toulouse sailed to Antioch, but was imprisoned by Tancred in 1102. He was released after promising not to create his own Crusader state, but he broke his promise and built a castle on Pilgrim's Mountain. Despite help from Emperor Alexius I, Raymond died before capturing Tripoli. The infant Alfonso Jordan, baptized in the Jordan River, was named successor, but his older brother, Bertrand, soon arrived and sent his brother back to France. Bertrand captured Tripoli with the help of King Baldwin of Jerusalem. Bertrand's son, Pons, ruled briefly and was succeeded by his son, Raymond II, who was a key figure in the Second Crusade. Raymond II was killed in 1152, and his son, Raymond III, became regent. Raymond III was captured by the Muslims in 1164, but was later released. He became regent for the young Baldwin IV, and played a crucial role in the kingdom's politics. Raymond III's son, Bohemond III, ruled Tripoli from 1164 to 1201. He was a powerful and influential figure, but he faced many challenges, including the loss of territories to the Mamluks and the Mongols. His son, Raymond IV, and grandson, Bohemond IV, continued to rule Tripoli, but the kingdom faced increasing pressure from the Mamluks. In 1289, the Mamluks captured Tripoli, and the last Crusader state in the Levant fell. The fall of Tripoli marked the end of the Crusader presence in the Holy Land. In the early 1100s, the Crusader states in the Holy Land were a mix of small but powerful territories. Bertrand, a key figure, died in 1112, and his son Pons took over. Pons quickly aligned himself with Baldwin II of Jerusalem, and together they planned to help Roger of Salerno fight against the Muslim states. However, Roger went into battle alone, and was defeated at the Battle of Ager Sanguinis. Angered by this, Pons and Baldwin sought revenge at the Battle of Hab. They went on to capture Tyre, and win the Battle of Azaz in 1125. But Pons later had a falling out with Fulk of Jerusalem, and was defeated at the Battle of Ruja. In 1137, the army of Damascus invaded Tripoli, and Pons was captured and executed. His son, Raymond II, blamed the local Christians for his father's death, and punished them severely. Raymond was later captured by Zengi, and had to hand over Baran Castle to secure his release. To strengthen his position, Raymond established the Knights Hospitaller in 1142, and gave them the fortress of Crac des Chevaliers. However, his life ended tragically when he was assassinated by the assassins in 1152. Raymond II's son, Raymond III, took over as the Count of Tripoli. His sister, Melisende, was considered for marriage to Emperor Manuel I, but the deal fell through when rumors suggested she might be illegitimate. Instead, Manuel married Princess Maria of Antioch, and Melisende ended up in a convent. In 1164, Raymond III and Bohemond III of Antioch tried to relieve the besieged city of Haram, but were defeated and captured. Amalric I of Jerusalem ruled Tripoli until Raymond was released in 1173, after a large ransom was paid. Amalric died in 1174, and his young son Baldwin IV, who had leprosy, became king. Baldwin came of age in 1176, and his sister Sibylla was widowed while pregnant. Despite his illness, Baldwin managed to rule effectively for a while, but he was succeeded by his nephew, Baldwin V, in 1185, who died the following year. During the power struggle for the throne of Jerusalem, Raymond III withdrew to Tripoli. He had made peace with the Ayyubids, but continued to attack their caravans, which angered Saladin. Raymond reluctantly made peace with Guy of Jerusalem, but they argued over strategy. 5 of Raymond's knights defected to Saladin, and the Ayyubids destroyed the Crusaders at the Battle of Hattin in 1187. Raymond was one of the few to escape, and his family, though captured, was allowed to return to Tripoli. Jerusalem fell soon after. Raymond III died of pleurisy in 1187, and his godson, Raymond IV, succeeded him. However, Bohemond III sent his son, Bohemond IV, to take control of Tripoli in 1201. The county of Tripoli was ruled from Antioch, until it fell to the Mamluks in 1268. Bohemond VII took control of what was left of Tripoli, the port of Latakia, in 1275. His mother, Sibylla, was regent, and while they made peace with the Mamluks, tensions with the Knights Templar led to conflicts. The Bishop of Tripoli upset the Templars, causing them to make indecisive attempts to take the port. The Imbriacos family tried to take Tripoli by surprise in 1282, but failed and was captured. Bohemond, despite promising to spare their lives, buried them in the sand and left them to starve to death. Bohemond VII died in 1287 without any children, and his sister traveled to Tripoli to take control. She faced opposition from the commune, but allied with the Genos. The Venetians and Pisans then conspired with the Mamluks against her. Despite seeking help from the Mongols, the Mamluks captured Tripoli in 1289. Acre, the last Crusader outpost in the Holy Land, fell 2 years later. During the High and Late Middle Ages, from 1053 to 1492, kings and their characters played a crucial role in the rise and fall of kingdoms. Some, like King James I of Aragon, who ruled for 63 years, were strong and successful. Others, like Emperor Henry IV, were known for their erratic and damaging behavior. Kings had absolute power, and while barons and the church could advise, they rarely overruled the king. The Magna Carta, signed by King John of England, is one of the few examples of limits being placed on a king's power. Kings formed alliances, built economies, and used the church to their advantage. Some took advantage of their neighbors' problems, while others got lucky with natural resources. Wars could start over trivial reasons, and alliances could be made or broken quickly. Marriages were often political, and children were used as pawns. Royal bastards could give families more power, but queens and princesses faced severe consequences if they defied the king's will. Love was rare in royal marriages, and most were seen as contracts. Producing an heir was vital, but infant mortality and childbirth risks were high. Infertility in queens could lead to divorce, and rumors of a king's infertility or homosexuality could undermine his position. Legitimacy was viewed differently across kingdoms, and the succession of a young ruler often required a regent to protect them. Queens were rare but notable, and princesses were often used in alliances. The Black Death, a devastating plague, killed a third of Europe's population and affected kings and peasants alike. The Mongol invasions in the 1240s also reshaped the political landscape, forcing kings to pay tribute or face destruction. Alliances and conflicts were shaped by geography, and the Crusades highlighted the importance of religion. Internal heretics were often seen as more dangerous than external enemies, and heretics like the Cathars and Hussites faced brutal suppression. The Church played a significant role in supporting crusaders and converting non-Christians, while heretics were punished harshly. The Middle Ages were a time of powerful kings, political marriages, and constant conflict. The lives of kings and their families were often dictated by the need to maintain power and protect their kingdoms. The years from 1054 to 1492 were a time when kings and emperors held incredible power, and their decisions shaped the world in ways we still see today. During this period, the Catholic Church, led by the Pope, was a force to be reckoned with. It wasn't just about faith, it was about power. The Church could make or break kings, decide who got to rule, and even take away entire kingdoms. One of the biggest fights was over who got to choose the bishops. Was it the Pope or the Emperor? This conflict, called the Investiture Controversy, changed how Europe worked. The Church had many tricks up its sleeve. They could kick kings out of heaven by excommunicating them, decide if marriages were valid, and even give away kingdoms to whoever they liked. This meant that kings had to be very careful about what they did and who they made enemies with. But the Church wasn't the only player. The Great Schism of 1054 split the Christian world into two parts, the Catholic Church in the West and the Orthodox Church in the East. This split led to a lot of fighting, especially in places like the Byzantine Empire and the Balkans. These regions were so busy fighting each other that they didn't see the Ottoman Empire growing stronger. Eventually, the Ottomans conquered Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, and took over much of Southeast Europe. Kings were like judges and juries in their own lands. They could do almost anything they wanted, from torturing people to get confessions to deciding if someone lived or died. Some kings were cruel, coming up with terrible ways to punish their enemies, like impaling them on stakes or pouring molten metal into their bodies. But there were rules too. A king couldn't be a king if he was mutilated, which is why blinding someone was a popular way to remove a rival without actually killing them. Sometimes killing a rival just made things worse. If a king was murdered, the Church might step in and punish the killer. So, instead of using swords, people started using methods that didn't draw blood, like suffocation, strangulation, or poisoning. The way people fought wars changed a lot during these years. Fortresses became stronger, and new weapons were invented to break them. On the battlefield, soldiers moved from using swords and shields to using bows, crossbows, and eventually firearms. Kings and generals had to learn new ways to fight and win battles. Some kings were great at this, but others were terrible and often lost because they let their pride get in the way. Sometimes the generals got so frustrated that they would lead a coup to get rid of a bad king. By the end of the 15th century, everything was about to change. In 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered the New World, opening up new lands and treasures for Europe. The clash of thrones was no longer just a European affair. The world was getting bigger, and the power of kings and emperors was about to face new challenges. These were times of great change, and the decisions made by those in power shape the world we live in today. The stories of these kings, emperors, and popes are a reminder of how much can happen when people have ultimate power.